Hey, this is Malika of Evanston Live TV, and we have back with us returning guests. The door is always open to this gentleman. Doesn't matter if he's clerk, he's alderman, and sky's the limit on what he's going to be next. Welcome back to the show, Alderperson Devon Reid of the 8th Ward. Welcome.
Great to be here. How are you, Malika, and all of the Evanston Live TV family?
I am doing amazing. I wanted to make sure that I got you on today because tomorrow's a pretty big day for you. Some very, very important topics will be covered. Well, every council meeting,
Every council meeting has, some more than others. So.
Yeah, it's important. And tomorrow you are discussing the unhoused. That seems to be growing in the 8th Ward. And I remember you bringing it up and you looking very, very concerned, like several meetings ago in the council meeting. And I think you had just found out that some of those who are unhoused are actually on the Evanston side, not the Chicago side. So if you want to tell the viewers exactly what's been going on, because I got very, very concerned, and I can tell you were very concerned, and I don't know that we have the resources to take care of everyone, and we want to.
What occurred was at this point over a month ago, a resident reached out by email to myself and the 49th Ward Alderman, which is the ward that borders Evanston, one of them, and said, hey, there is an encampment under the Howard train station, and it's making myself and others feel unsafe to travel using the Howard train station. And my, in all seriousness and earnesty, my response was, Evanston is willing to stand by and help Chicago however we can. Because it was my understanding that particular portion of the train station was in Chicago. I think a lot of us operated under the understanding that Evanston ended at the western side of the Howard Viaduct, where the train station is. We're the last business in Evanston. In fact, the chief of police had that same assumption. My predecessor, who served in my seat for over 30 years, had that assumption. Our city manager, many other folks. And so it was interesting when Chicago called me back about a week later and said, hey, we've looked at our records and shows that this is actually Evanston. And, that was quite shocking. And so within an hour, I was down there talking to the folks at the train station, trying to understand what their situation is and how in Evanston we can best help. And then the very next day, the health director was out there as well, communicating with the population, taking a census of how many folks are there. And we determined that there's anywhere between 15 and 20 some odd folks that occupy that space on a rolling basis. And so we immediately, I called together a meeting between the city of Chicago, 49th Ward, the Department of Family and Support Services, the CTA, city staff here in Evanston, from the police department to our health director, to our policy coordinator, our city manager. So this is, and then service providers such as peer services, connections for the homeless, and others. And so this was a big meeting to ensure that we were acting as swiftly as possible to both ensure that we were housing these folks and providing with the resources they need, but also to make sure that, I stood out there for about 45 minutes one day and, just observing mothers and their children walking by this site. And then to be clear about what was going on here at the Howard train station is this was an encampment that would bring up the, memories for some folks of what Skid Row might look like in LA and other places, because there was also very deep substance abuse issues very clearly going on. I walked by and there, folks strewn out on the street, and so it was a terrible scene. And so I felt the need to do something. immediately, not only for not only for the residents of my ward, but for the folks living in this encampment who are residents of my ward, because they now live here in Evanston, and some of them have deep ties to Evanston. Went through District 65 and 202, and grew up here in Evanston. And so we ultimately came together to request a $1.75 million investment in homelessness.
Wow. Well, I hope you get the support, because this isn't an Eighth Ward problem. This is an Evanston issue. This is an Evanston concern. This is humanity. So I really do hope that you get the support on that. And someone who used to live in LA, yes, Skid Row. God, if you don't have a soul to walk by there and not feel something and feel so helpless that you can't help all of those people. I mean, Skid Row is kind of like a city
Yeah.
of those unhoused. And in LA, I mean, the situation is like, I mean, people are setting up tents in Beverly Hills. That's like how crowded it's become with the unhoused. And we definitely don't want that to happen here in Evanston. Have you all reached out to Impact Behavioral Health? I know that they help families who have mental health issues who are unhoused and needing assistance.
I have not directly reached out to Impact Behavioral Health, but we're in conversation with District 65. They are part of this request, because I thought we cannot address homelessness in Evanston without addressing homelessness amongst our children and their parents. And so that's why we put into the request a $200,000 ask for District 65. And we know that they're struggling right now. The district has a large budget deficit. They don't have the financial flexibility that the city has. And we need to make sure that we're looking out for the district. And District 65 is struggling now. And oftentimes when the district or other bodies are suffering these kinds of budget crunches, the first programs to go are the programs that are for the most disenfranchised and marginalized people in their system. And so I want to make sure that the city is stepping up with the power that we have and the financial flexibility that we have to ensure that that doesn't happen in District 65.
Do you think you will get your request met by the Human Service Committee as well as council?
We've got it approved by Human Services, so it's moving on to council. It'll be on not tomorrow, but the next agenda. And it, I think there's going to be some amendments to it, but I think certainly we need to fund the health department with $300,000 as per my request. We need to fund District 65 with $200,000, and then the money for connections. I think we'll have a discussion about bits and pieces of it. I think there's several $100,000 that would be going to ensuring that youth in our community between the ages of 18 and 24 have housing. There's funding, and that helps prevent future encampments. There's funding for housing assistance, for rental assistance, to make sure that eviction prevention work. And so that money goes a long way, far further than having to take someone who's already on the streets and getting them housed. And then and I think we need to shift some of the funding around to our Parks and Rec department as well, because we have a wonderful outreach team there that we need to bolster and support, which they were really instrumental in helping us do outreach to the population there.
Okay, well, let us know if we need to put some pressure on any council member out there that any council member that won't give you what you actually need for this. I would seriously question their soul. But I met Lori Flanagan of Impact Behavioral through the Leadership Evanston, and I know that they're building a whole new building in Skokie,
Yeah.
and sounds like they're doing some amazing things for families.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I know that, they're actually through my connection with District 65. I know that I think the building that you're referring to is designated for children and their families who are in District 65 to ensure that there is space for them. And we had over 300, we had approaching on 300 students in the district over the last year that are classified as McKinney-Vento, which means that they're homeless, or couch surfing, which is homelessness by another name. And many of those students, far too many of those students, were unable to truly get the support that they needed because the district just doesn't have the resources. And that might segue us very nicely into our next discussion about Northwestern.
Yes. Now, there's a lot to talk about with Northwestern.
Yes.
But what's coming to mind right now in this conversation
Yeah.
is, what is Northwestern doing to help? Because again, this isn't just an 8th Ward concern. This is all of Evanston, and Northwestern is part of Evanston. They have plenty of resources to assist those who are unhoused with mental health issues, substance abuse. So what's been that conversation?
Well, around housing, the conversation I've had with Northwestern is about regarding the migrant situation that we have going on, which contributes to potential encampments. Chicago certainly has been dealing with encampments for migrants because they're being bussed here and they're having to sleep outside and inside of police stations. And then there's the horrors about what officers have been accused of with those migrants sleeping inside and outside of the stations. So Northwestern, we brought them to the table to see how Evanston can step up and support our neighbors, Chicago, and our neighbors who are, in fact, the migrants who've been bussed here from Texas. And we still haven't fully laid out a plan yet with Northwestern for that, but we're working on it. But I obviously, Northwestern needs to step up a lot more to support the community. And here's the way I look at it. A lot of folks talk about a pilot agreement, a payment in lieu of taxes, or a community benefits agreement, particularly around the construction of this stadium, and using this as an opportunity to get one or both of those. And you look at Massachusetts, which a lot of folks hold up as, as far as being enshrined in law, in state law, a national model for payment in lieu of taxes, where in Massachusetts, institutions like Northwestern would be required to pay 25% of what their property tax bill would be, with the opportunity to shave another half of that off for being a good neighbor, or whatever term they use in their law. And there was a study, a report issued by staff a while ago that looked into what Northwestern estimated what Northwestern would pay in property taxes if, in fact, they did pay property taxes. And that number was certainly needs to be adjusted for inflation now and other factors, but $40 million annually is what they would pay in property taxes. And we know that Massachusetts model, 25% of that is what they'd be on the hook for. Easy math there, $10 million a year is what Northwestern would pay in property taxes. But then you look at, you break it down a little further, where do your property taxes go? And 20% goes to the city. So in that case, Northwestern would owe $1 to $2 million a year to the city of Evanston in property taxes. Unlike in Massachusetts and some of the cities on the East Coast, where the school district and the municipality are a single taxing body, similar to Chicago, where the mayor appoints the school board, and so the school board recommends a budget, but it ultimately gets approved by council. And so here in Evanston, 70% of our tax bill goes to the school district. So that means Northwestern will be on the hook, yes, to Evanston for $1 to $2 million a year, but to the school districts for about $7 million a year. And Northwestern is, yes, we've had the Good Neighbor Fund for some time, but we've never had a Good Neighbor Fund with our school district. And so my big fight here that I've been pushing for is, with that model in mind, we should be pushing Northwestern to contribute far more to our schools. And, the city, while we're not great, we're good. I mean, we need to lock in that $2 million. Maybe we need to, adjust some of these numbers for inflation and move it up a bit. But we really need to lock in Northwestern contributing to our school districts, because in those other situations, that's where you are seeing, when it comes to Harvard or MIT, their money is going towards supporting schools. And it makes sense because, Northwestern at the end of the day is an educational institution. It makes sense that their funding would be primarily going to uplifting their mission, which is educating people and providing knowledge. And so I think we need to be pushing for as much as we can for our school districts. And if Northwestern, let's say the life of the stadium is just, if we're just to say 40 years, a $10 million a year contribution between the city and the school districts means that Northwestern would be paying $400 million, over the lifetime of that stadium. And so I think that is important for us to lock that in and get that funding out to the schools.
I think that is a great idea. It only makes sense that they would give to D65 and 202, all of our educational systems, institutions here in Evanston. That makes perfect sense. I mean, I was thinking, them setting up shelters in each ward, to assist families, unhoused families. They can afford to do that, or some of the student housing, assisting there, moving some families in. There's so many things.
And I think that the funding should go to do that. Northwestern, again, they're an educational institution. They're not, housing developers. I don't think they need to pretend to be anything that they're not. But what they do need to do is give.
They're not experts at concerts.
And again, I don't think they need to pretend to be anything that they're not. But I do think they need to give the money to the folks, to the city, to the school districts, so we can, as folks who have done this before, have the resources to tackle those issues.
Mm-hmm. I agree. Well, I hope they move on that. Does it look like they're?
Well, they started. I mean, I feel like I can take credit for the fact that they included $500,000 for the school districts there, because that's something I've been pushing hard for. But that's nowhere near enough, and we need far more. And I've shared that with the leadership at Northwestern.
Good. Well, thank you for always pushing and fighting for the people, Alderperson Reid. I mean, you bring some bold concepts and ideas, but they're needed. Like, we can't just keep going about the way we've been going. Something needs to really change. Like, a really bold move needs to happen.
Yeah, and I'm trying. I mean, I think I'm the only council member who has put forward proposals that have new revenue attached to it. And again, in the city, we have a $200 million unfunded facilities infrastructure liability. We have a $100 million unfunded infrastructure liability. We have around $200 million unfunded with our pensions. So, and then that doesn't even layer on top. I don't think we have an estimate for what our unfunded liability is for things like affordable housing, homelessness, addressing the social issues. And so we don't even have an estimate for those. And so we're talking about hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars that we need to come up with in the next few decades to be able to both draw down on what past generations have failed us on maintaining, but also to make sure we're making an investment for the future. So we're leaving the city in better hands, in a better condition for the new folks who inherit it. And I think it's important that all of us come up with, ideas on how to cut costs and how to generate new revenue. But we're not going to be able to cut our way out of this because there's, too much that residents expect and need from their local government. And so we have to grow the pie without, overburdening our most marginalized residents.
Yeah, and with us being a sanctuary city as well, the welcoming city, we're going to need more money if we're going to be opening the doors to everyone to come here. I took a ride along with an Evanston police officer a few months ago, and we had to rush back to the police station because there was an unhoused man who came from another state, because Evanston now is known around the country to those looking for shelter, looking for housing. They're making their way somehow to Evanston, Illinois. And so you had a very angry man with his family, looking for housing, and there was nowhere to take him, to place him, and he was ready to destroy the Evanston Police Department. Of course, they calmed him down and everything, and they did find a place for him. But from what I understand, people are showing up every day with all their belongings, their family, to the police station.
And unfortunately, I think every day people are leaving Evanston too. I push back on folks who say that, sometimes, and I know you're not saying this, but that by making investments in homelessness and trying to address the issue, that we are creating some beacon that's calling all of the folks who are struggling with being unhoused in the area to Evanston. And we're not. I'm someone who personally experienced homelessness as a teenager, as a youth and a teenager. And so when I experienced it, there's nowhere in Evanston for my grandmother and I to go to be housed here. And I know that from the numbers from District 65, the number of folks who are on the Kinney Bento and who just disappeared from the district, those are families that were homeless or struggling with housing here in Evanston and just unfortunately left because there was no help. And there are far more folks who are living in Evanston now and need help and can't find it than those stragglers who end up here for one reason or another. And I think we really need to focus on how do we get the funding to support those folks who have lived here and have children here and make sure that they can stay here.
Yes, I'm sure it's a ton of people who agree with you absolutely on that. And then you're also tackling another situation with minimum wage.
Yes.
See, that's why we like you, Alderperson Reid, because you are looking out for you are for the people. The people. You're being creative, looking for resources to help everyone. So minimum wage. So what do the people need to know about this push?
Yeah, so this one has been tough. We've been able to do some really neat things this term. I led the fight for a fair work week to make sure that folks knew what their schedule was, ahead of time, so they could attend, their child's report card pickup, so they could go to parent-teacher conferences, so they could, be a part of their children's lives and have a predictable schedule. And now it's time to make sure that those parents and those families and other folks throughout the city are getting a raise. If you are making minimum wage right now in Evanston and we implement this bill, you will get a $3,000 raise and over $3,000 raise. That means that folks will be able to pay for medical visits, for groceries, for rent, for the things that are necessary. Do we need more? Yes. But this will be a substantial raise for individuals and allow them to do more here in our community. And, this, and for some workers, it could mean even more, particularly if you're a tip server. Part of what we're doing here is eliminating the tip sub minimum wage. And so that wage increase could be, quite substantial for them. And what's important about eliminating the sub minimum wage is that we know that tipping has a history in America rooted in slavery and racism. It was post-emancipation when African Americans were free and entering the workforce in this country, when the system of tipping was adopted and implemented here in America. And it was a way to not have to pay Black folks for their work. And it was a way to, force them to be reliant on the generosity of their patrons to make money. And it was actually right here in our own backyard in Pullman. I'm sure folks are familiar with the story of the Pullman Porters of Chicago and the rail yard there, the Pullman rail yard, where the Pullman Porters, who were mostly Black men, stood up and organized and ensured that they got fair wages. And when the first minimum wage law was passed, everyone was included. Most industries were included in that, except for, and the Pullman Porters got their fight and won their fight to get included there too. But restaurant workers were not included, who were primarily Black women. And to this day, restaurant workers, waitresses, waiters are disproportionately Black women. And 2 out of 10 Americans at some point in their lives work in the restaurant industry. It's the largest industry in our country. And by eliminating the sub-minimum wage, we can ensure that folks have a predictable wage and that they are, for example, during the pandemic, when folks were applying for unemployment, many tipped workers were not able to get unemployment, or were not able to get full unemployment because of their tipped wages and it not being a part of their standard wages. And so there's so many people left in the dark and during that time, and it was unfortunate. And this ordinance will help correct that. It'll give folks a raise. It'll ensure that we have funding for our Mayor's Summer Youth Employment Program, and it'll make sure that we keep Evanston competitive, because communities that have adopted these an increased minimum wage, and especially this elimination of the sub minimum wage, they have faster job growth in Evanston. They are importing workers rather than exporting workers. And in fact, DC recently adopted a similar ordinance, and and I believe the county outside of DC has lost 20,000 jobs since they've adopted this, because folks are moving into the city, coming into the city to get work. And, in my ward, being on the board of Chicago, why would someone choose to work at McDonald's on Howard Street when they could go a few blocks down and work at a McDonald's in Chicago and get paid a higher wage? Or there's a CVS at Asbury near in my ward, and why would you choose to apply to CVS when you could apply to Walgreens right across the street and get a higher wage and make $3,000 more a year? And so we need to make sure that we are creating competition here in Evanston for our businesses, and sending a clear message that if you work here in Evanston, this city will look out for you, and we'll make sure that you're going to make a living wage.
So what's the support on the council?
I think particularly around eliminating the sub minimum wage, folks are looking to see what Chicago does. So Chicago is looking at adopting this, and they have the votes in Chicago. And so in early October, Chicago will eliminate the sub minimum wage for tipped workers, and Evanston would be put at a disadvantage. And I think some of my colleagues are waiting for that. Some of my colleagues just philosophically do not believe that municipalities should raise minimum wage. To me, that's absurd. And businesses are threatening to leave. And one of my colleagues said that folks are going to start moving to Wilmette. I don't think Wilmette is Evanston's competition. Some folks do, but the cost of not adopting this, I think, completely outweighs any potential cost of adopting it. And we saw when the county increased the minimum wage, and cities were allowed to opt in or opt out. And many of our neighbors opted out, and Evanston did not. One of the things that I'm going to be prepared for the next meeting is to look at the numbers, the job data there between Evanston and our neighbors when they opted out of a higher minimum wage and ours. And I would bet you, short of the pandemic, Evanston had better job growth, better employment rates, better wages than those communities because of our opting into and staying in the minimum wage ordinance there.
Yeah, well, I think it would be awesome. I would think everyone would be supportive of that because at some point, whether you started working in high school or whatever, you were making minimum wage, right?
Oh, don't think everybody did. I asked my colleagues when they were voting against it. I asked folks to to acknowledge whether or not they've ever worked a minimum wage job, and I don't believe all of my colleagues have.
Wow. Well, yeah, some people a little more, I guess, privileged.
Yes. Yes.
I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, but those of us who, got jobs young and minimum wage, and even in your early 20s working for tips with $2 and something an hour, trying to pay rent and your utilities and a car note. And oh, yes, this would be very, very helpful because if you're not a bartender, bartenders tend to do pretty well.
Yeah.
But everyone else, it's a hustle. It's
It
rough.
is.
It's rough. Minimum wage and tips. Yeah, so I was reading that Soul and Smoke.
Yes.
Getting rid of their whole tip process, and they're just going to pay people more. I loved it.
And that's exactly in the organization that we are working with, which is One Fair Wage and Higher Roads Restaurants. They have education. They have workshops and trainings that they do for local businesses to help them understand, just like Soul and Smoke is doing, how you can operate on a different model. Because if your model requires you to pay your workers a sub-minimum wage and not ensure that they have predictable wages, then your model is flawed. And maybe it's time to explore some new models, and that's exactly what these organizations help folks do. And so it's doable. Soul and Smoke is a extremely recognized and renowned barbecue soul restaurant, and so if they can do it, other folks in town, they're some of the fanciest restaurants around in Evanston, and I've been to some of them owned by folks who are coming out complaining about minimum wage when you can't go there for under $150, $200 per person. So it's like how do you square that peg where you can't afford to pay your workers a living wage?
Right. Soul and Smoke, they're award winning. I mean, I hope they really set the tone for everyone else to follow their lead on that. Because it comes down to humanity, people. That's what it comes down to. It's just pure, like, everyone should be able to just be able to take care of their basic necessities. Like, why should anyone struggle in that way when they're working so hard? It's not like people are just sitting back, just, in those industries, that service industry, you are hustling, your feet are killing you at the end of the day. Oftentimes you have to go in sick because you can't afford to not go into work, and your back is hurting. And I mean, it's, and then some are going to school too, so they're not getting much rest. I mean, I just, it's about humanity at the end of the day.
And if I can add one thing about humanity and talk about very quickly one of the policies that I'm trying to move forward in this budget season, because again, I think it's important that council members are looking for new revenue. I think it's important that and staff that we're putting those ideas forward and having a discussion about them and fighting to get it passed. But one that I'm working on now is since you mentioned humanity, is a tax on automation. We know that we are moving toward a future where more and more human jobs are going to be replaced by AI and by machines. And where are we going? And you look at the grocery industry, which over the last few years since the pandemic has grown tremendously. They've had record profits, and more the grocery industry is moving toward adding those self-checkout kiosks. These self-checkout kiosks are taking away jobs. You'll see now, whereas you would have had a line full of baggers and cashiers. Most folks are going to the self-checkout, and I don't begrudge folks for going to self-checkout. Let's get in and out. That's fine. But we have to realize that those are taking away jobs that would provide more resources here locally. Instead, now those resources are being funneled up to the top. And you look at places like Amazon, where they're opening what's called Amazon Go stores that are completely autonomous when it comes to checkout. You grab the item off the shelf, you put it in your bag or your cart or whatever, and you walk out without interacting with the person. And so when that model really becomes more widespread, we are going to see hundreds and thousands of jobs, if not thousands of jobs, leave the city of Evanston, leave our area, and that's going to mean less money in the pockets of folks who are locally. And the city needs to make sure that we're getting ready for that future, and that we are getting the revenue that we need to start taking care of folks. And so I'm proposing a $5,000 tax per year, annual tax on each one of those kiosks. And so you look at a business that has about 5 of them. A lot of them have 5. Some of them have as many as 8 or 9. But the average business, would be paying around $30,000 a year. And these are, again, big box grocery retailers that have seen record profits. You're not seeing mom and pop shops with these self-checkout kiosks. And I'm happy to write the ordinance in a way that only attacks these big shops. But this would bring in hundreds of thousands, around $150,000-$200,000 is my estimate a year for the city of Evanston, that we could put toward workforce development, toward the mayor's summer youth employment program, to ensure that our youth are being employed at small local businesses, and getting that job and that work experience, and that we're able to pay them a living wage so they can support themselves and their families as they're getting that early education and skill.
Well, definitely keep us up to date on what's happening with that, because that is a huge concern. In the entertainment industry, it's a huge concern too. AI taking over, and I mean that's why SAG-AFTRA is on strike. I mean, it's real. It's real. I don't, people talked about this day coming years ago, but I don't think anyone thought it was possible to replace humans. And here we are. It's
not, and I think a lot of people maybe even arrogantly thought it's not, as a lawyer, it's not gonna be my job. As an accountant, it's not gonna be my job. As the writer, it's not gonna be my job. It's gonna be the burger flipper. It's gonna be the, someone else toward the bottom of the chain. And no, this AI technology is coming after, white collar, high paid jobs, and it's going to be able to do what you could do in seconds. And even the lawyers and the accountants are soon going to be and the writers are going to be I don't think disposable, but as far as folks who are looking to penny pinch at the top and gain more money for themselves. I mean, doctors, these the AI machines are coming after some doctors because they can have the fullness of human knowledge at their fingertips and diagnose. It's not a human diagnosis, but in some cases, diagnose better than a doctor can. And so, it's coming for a lot of jobs that we did not, think about maybe 10, 15 years ago. And we need to be prepared for that. And in a small way, this is what I think a municipality can do to get that kick started. but we're going to need the federal government and state government to really look out for us and create a value-added tax that will allow us to support things like guaranteed universal income and other measures that will ensure that folks have a decent standard of living and are able to do which also what I think is beautiful about this opportunity is, some of this will allow us to get back to doing the most human things, which are being in unity with each other and entertaining each other and, and supporting one another rather than having to do what for some folks feels like meaningless, jobs. But, I think it's both going to be a difficult future to transition to, but also if we do it right, it'll create a beautiful future that allows us to be more human.
Devon, you're young enough to be my son, so this is before your time. But the Jetsons, all anyone has to do is watch the Jetsons. It laid it out what's happening to us right now. Go back and watch the Jetsons, and you will see that's where we're headed. That was pretty much the blueprint. That's where we're headed. And yeah. All they had was sprockets that pretty much did everything. I mean, you really have to be in computer science data, the person entering the information to make the AI work. Those are going to be the jobs.
Oh, I mean, and no, they're creating. There are robots that are combining AI with, MIT has some of the neatest, humanoid-like robots that are coming out, and so pretty soon you put the AI in the human-like robot, and it'll input the data itself. So these machines have self-learning technology, and we're headed to a very interesting future. I think about the here and now, and the here and now is we got jobs that are being lost in the grocery industry, which are entry-level jobs, but these are jobs that help people get through college, that help people put their children through college, that help folks survive. And so we need to ensure that we are encouraging folks to keep these jobs, and that where they aren't, we're still allowing for innovation, but making sure that we're capturing some of that pie to make sure we're protecting these.
It's all about humanity. It's all about humanity. They're even about to take over the Uber drivers. Have you seen those cars?
Yes.
Goodness gracious. But please, people, it's about humanity. So let's stay engaged and support Alderperson Reid, because he is truly looking out for humanity on so many levels. The unhoused concerns that we have here, getting Northwestern to contribute more to assist with our unhoused concerns, and minimum wage, making sure all those hard workers that we rely on right now until AI takes over all our jobs, making sure that they can just live and take care of their families. And, they're not asking for a Rolls Royce, or, they just want to be able to survive and live, not just exist, So thank you so much, Alderperson Reid, for everything that you're doing. And the door is always open, as always, that here at Evanston, to let us know what's going on and get people informed so that they can support you and know what's happening. And everything we just talked about impacts every single person here in Evanston. Absolutely.
Thank you, Malika. Thank you, Evanston Live TV.
All right. Okay, this is Malika, Evanston Live TV. You all stay engaged.